Thank you all for joining tonight. My name is Sean Stapleton. I'm a veterinarian at Mount Laurel Animal Hospital. I graduated from Cornell University. I'm one of the ER veterinarians at Mount Laurel. Tonight, we are going to be talking about veterinary nutrition. If everybody could just make sure that your audio is muted, preferably cameras off. You can type into the chat. I'm going to answer a lot of questions at the end of the presentation, but please let me know if you're having any difficulties with audio or anything like that. Otherwise, we're going to get started here. And we're going to get started with a story about my dog, Minnie. So this is Minnie. She is a 7-year-old beagle. I and my partner adopted her our first year at veterinary school. She was one of our teaching beagles. And she came to us. She had just recently been spayed. They told us while she was in the hospital doing her job, she ate 4 cups of food a day. And when we adopted her, we went to Walmart. We bought a big bag of dog food. We, weren't really too discerning. We just picked one out that was the cheapest. We were students. And we started feeding Minnie 2 cups of food a day. And shortly after we started feeding her that food, she started breaking out in all of these skin rashes. She developed ear infections. She also started having some diarrhea. We took her to the vet and they told us, this is probably a food allergy. We need to switch her to a prescription diet. So we switched her to that diet and things cleared up. But shortly afterward, continuing her on 2 cups of food a day, she really started to gain weight fast. And we were living with some other vet students and, they told us, wow, Minnie's kind of getting hefty. So we had to work for quite a while to get her weight back down. And it's still, a work in progress. We were looking at her the other night and we're just kind of like, wow, I think we need to cut back on our food again. So I shared this story about Minnie strictly to commiserate with everyone because nutrition is a very challenging topic. Veterinarians aren't very good at helping owners because there's so much we don't know out there. And tonight I'm going to help kind of elucidate some of the hidden gems to know about nutrition, because I know what it's like when you go to the pet store. It looks like this. You go to the pet store or Walmart and there's just a big aisle of food, floor to ceiling options, so many different brands, so many different styles. There's bags of kibble, canned foods for different breeds, for different stages of life. There's even like a weird refrigerator that has refrigerated or frozen food. So how do we make sense of this? How, as pet owners, do we pick the best diet for our pets? So there are essentially 3 kind of categories of pet food out there. In our first category down here, we've got the wet or dry type, the conventional diet. So this is what 90% of pets in the United States are eating, are this type of, classically what you think of when you think of feeding your pet is the wet or dry form. A second type is what's considered raw or unprocessed. So what you might find in the refrigerated section, or it might even be frozen, but it isn't cooked or, made into some other style like the kibble or the wet food. So the colloquial term is raw. And then finally, what's growing in popularity recently is the home cooked diet. So instead of going to the store and buying something for your pet, you literally cook a meal for your pet at home. And that, is becoming a lot more popular lately. And we'll sort of chat about, why is that? But to start with the most common type of dog food, the dog and cat food, the dry or wet style of food. How do you pick between, say, like a dry or a wet? What are the pros and cons? So the dry kibble, that's probably what, a majority of you are feeding to your pets. The benefits are it's pretty easy to select different options. There's a lot of options out there. There are also, pretty big bags, so you can buy in bulk, you can store for quite a while. And in general, this is just kind of what everybody goes for. Some people might say, there are added benefits of, say, like dental health of using like a kibble diet, because as pets will chew on the kibble, it like abrades the tooth and it will, debride plaque. Truthfully, that's kind of debatable if that really helps. I know most cats, for instance, aren't really good at chewing food and breaking up the kibble. My dog Minnie, for instance, is just like a little Hoover and just sucks up all the food that we put in her bowl. So it's not like we're actually achieving any of the goals of getting her diet, where we want it to be. And then this advanced for some reason, and I'm trying to get it to go back. Let's see. Well, that's fine. We'll make it work. So the other style is the wet version. So wet food versus dry food. The wet food is certainly more palatable. So overall, dogs and cats are mostly driven to eat by their sense of smell, and the canned diets are smellier. So if your pet isn't necessarily a good eater, kind of picky, or if your pet does, not feel well, we typically go for canned diets because that's the preferred option in terms of stimulating their appetite in a lot of cases. The added benefit of a wet diet is also that it increases the amount of water that your pet is intaking. So cats in particular are really bad drinkers. We don't really know why they're bad drinkers. They just aren't good at keeping themselves hydrated. Cats are more prone to kidney or urinary disease. They're more prone to constipation. So having a cat on, say, a canned diet is a good way of getting them to drink water. So, that's something that you can certainly consider for your cat if you're worried about their water intake. Overall, comparing wet versus dry food, there isn't truthfully a right or wrong option. You could even consider mixing it up. I would tell you that, in particular, just be cautious with the amount of wet food you're feeding, because if you were previously feeding a dry food and then you start feeding the same amount of wet food, your pet might be more prone to weight gain with that. And then this slide I advanced to a little prematurely. So the raw food option, or the unprocessed food. This is gaining in popularity because there are some more testimonial type evidence coming out. It's not, say, scientific studies, but people will testify, particularly online, if you're doing research online as to what you should feed your pet. Raw food may be more digestible. It might be what your pet should be eating. You hear people cite, oh, my dog is descendant of a wolf, or my cat is a predator. So they're made to eat these uncooked diets. And these diets, they do have to be refrigerated. They do have a shorter shelf life. We're going to chat about, how do we pick between the conventional and the raw diets, but these are certainly becoming more popular, and you'll hear about people testifying that this helped my dog's digestion. It helped with their dental health. It helped, with a lot of different things we'll hear online. And so I want to chat a little bit about that moving forward, but just to kind of introduce the concept, raw food is out there and it's gaining in popularity, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with using a raw food by any means. Absolutely. It is just that there are certain risks associated with raw food, but there's risks associated with any food we eat. So to directly compare the two, so the conventional, the drier or wet kibble versus the unprocessed or raw, how do we decide which one of those do we feed our pet? Which one is the best? The first thing I think about is nutrition. So which one is more nutritious? Which one provides better ingredients and better daily nutrient requirements for our pets? And I see a lot of things coming into the chat right now. I just wanted to let everybody know I can't see them right now on my computer. So I'll go back through at the end just to kind of a disclaimer as chats are coming in. But when it comes to comparing nutrition, so at this point in time, veterinary medicine is very evidence driven. So veterinarians make their recommendations based off of the scientific studies that are published. And as of right now, there truly are no long-term studies available that compare raw versus conventional diets and whether or not pets do better on either diet. There, like I said, is a lot of testimonial evidence out there. So people saying, you know, this was better for my dog or this was better for my cat. But as a whole, and this is speaking as of this past March, was the most recent publication of scientific review of the literature on pet nutrition that I read through in preparation for this presentation. And it states plainly that we don't know long-term which of these diets are better for your pet. We can rest assured, though, that there is a body, a governing agency. I guess governing is kind of a strong word because they don't necessarily enforce this, but they do have standards. So the entity is called AAFCO, and they basically make all of the standards for pet food. And they dictate what ingredients can go into pet food, what's safe for a pet, and what the minimum nutrient requirements are. And then it's the responsibility of every state to make sure that in their state, if a pet food is being sold on the shelf, it is meeting those AAFCO standards. And it is also safe. So it's got both nutritious value and it has good ingredients and it is safe. So that's kind of up to the states to regulate. And we'll talk about that here shortly. But overall, you can rest assured that if a diet has made it to the shelf, there is somebody watching your back to make sure that that diet is safe for your pet. The next thing we need to consider is cost. And the bottom line is when it comes to cost, if you're on a limited budget, which nowadays pretty much everybody is, I get it. Anymore, if you're thinking strictly about, you know, which is going to be the biggest bang for my buck or stretch a dollar farther, you're really looking at the Kibble Diet. That's pretty straightforward, simply because you can typically buy those in a greater bulk. They store for longer. The reality is that is the least financially expensive option. The canned and the raw diets, those are definitely going to be more expensive because they only come in smaller bulk, and you can only store them for so long. They're in smaller cans. You either have to store them in the fridge. So, you know, most of the time having a Kibble diet is truly going to be the, you know, cheapest option. And then finally, you know, the last thing we have to consider, like I mentioned before, is the fact that we have to consider which is going to keep our pet from getting sick. Which of these diets it presents the most risk when it comes to either carrying bacteria that cause food poisoning, carrying potential toxins, you know, things that should not be in the diet that are in there, or, you know, carrying an imbalance of minerals or nutrients such that a pet is being overexposed to a type of vitamin, say, and they're getting too much of it and it causes them to become sick. The reality is when it comes to infectious disease, and you know, I've studied this a lot. I've worked with the CDC in their foodborne disease outbreak branch. And in my Master's of Public Health Studies with Johns Hopkins, I've looked into this a lot, and I can tell you that overall, when it comes to bacterial disease, the bigger risk is unfortunately the raw foods. Now, there's certainly raw food out there that is safe, and companies are monitored. You know, there are people watching your back, like the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, to ensure that these diets do not have, in general, bacteria like salmonella or E. coli in them. but the fact that they contain meat that is not cooked, it's the exact same as if you were to eat, say, like uncooked steak or uncooked pork or chicken. The risk is still there, unfortunately. And what we've seen is that, at least within the past 5 to 10 years, there are more recalls associated with raw pet food than there are for the conventional processed food. Yes, conventional like kibble, that has been recalled because there have been instances, 2008 and 2012 were the most recent ones, when kibble had to be recalled because it had salmonella. However, we're seeing that more frequently in raw foods, and that's even more concerning simply because, like I said at the beginning, about 90% of pets in the United States are fed kibble and wet food, whereas we've got, 5 to 10% of pets are eating raw food. So there's basically a ninth of the pets are eating raw food, but we're seeing more outbreaks. So to me, that's concerning from my perspective as a health professional. Certainly we have to be mindful of every food. That is something we always kind of have to keep in the back of our mind. But the risk, in my opinion, is greater with the raw food. And it's not just for your pet. It's also for your family that you kind of have to be careful about, because humans can also come in contact with these bugs as well. So if you were to, say, handle your pet's raw food and it had salmonella, and you didn't wash your hands and you touched your face or your mouth, you could get that salmonella. Or if you touched their bowl and it wasn't clean, or if you even let them lick you, that is a way that they could convey that bacteria to you, and then you or your family could get sick. It's especially concerning if you've got people in the household that are immunocompromised, that are young, that are old, or pregnant. Those are kind of the biggest categories of people that are most at risk when it comes to foodborne disease. For some of us, we get maybe a little diarrhea, we might get an upset tummy, and that's it. But for some people, foodborne illness can be life-threatening. So because it's in my opinion that there's more evidence that these raw foods may be a bigger risk, I at least tell owners there are certainly safe foods out there. And if you want to try to feed these foods, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just we have to be careful, and we have to make sure we're washing our hands and washing bowls. And you could even, if you're worried about the processing of food at a plant, you could perhaps cook the raw food at home, just like you would a raw meat for yourself. So, there are options if you want to try that diet, and it certainly isn't wrong if you're currently feeding it. And if your pet is happy and healthy, then that's excellent. That's all we want. But that's just kind of, my 2 cents on the comparison of the two. And then out of, left field comes this idea of people just cooking food for their pets themselves. So literally going to the store and cooking and getting ingredients and cooking for your dog and your cat, just like you would yourself or your family, your children, anything like that. For some people, you'd look like this. It would be a lot of fun cooking for your pet. If this were me, this would be me. So, I don't think I have enough time to cook for myself a lot of the time. So I don't know if I would be able to balance feeding my voracious beagle. But so why are people doing this? Well, part of the reason is there's so much information out there. If you Google, what do I feed my pet? You'll get like 600 million hits on Google. And the first page will tell you what I'm telling you. And the second hit will tell you the opposite. So a lot of people are getting really confused about what to do. And so they just say, well, forget it. I'm not going to feed anything at the store. I'm just going to feed what I cook, and that will make me feel the safest for my pet. The biggest thing when it comes to feeding these home cooked diets is I strongly, strongly recommend getting in contact with a veterinary nutritionist. So just like there are veterinary dermatologists and surgeons and internal medicine doctors, people that have specialized training in their field, they're veterinary nutritionists. And these people can help you make a diet for your pet. So they'll work with you to pick the ingredients you want to feed, and then they'll make sure that your pet is going to be getting the nutrients that they need. They'll give you recipes, they'll give you treat recommendations. It's honestly an excellent service if you want to pursue that. They are few and far between. It is kind of hard to find one, but this is something that can potentially be done remotely. So I would strongly recommend reaching out to a nutritionist to make sure that what you're cooking is nutritionally adequate. Because one of the most recent studies found that 95% of diets that you just find online for pets, so just like I could Google, how to make chicken soup at home, you could Google how to make food for Fluffy, and you'll find a lot of recipes, but a study found that 95% of those diets are deficient in some type of nutrient that's essential for a pet. So a nutritionist is definitely the way to go if you want to home cook for your pet. And the reason I stress that is because we are finding that certain diets that are deficient in certain types of nutrients can lead to disease. So I'll kind of pick on this example just to kind of explain this a little bit further. So over the past 5 to 10 years, grain-free diets have kind of been growing as a fad, mostly through marketing and testimonials online, very similar to how people were becoming very worried about, eating gluten. So, grain is like rice or barley or wheat or corn. But some people, human diets were worried that eating gluten would be, harmful to your gut, which certainly there are people out there that are allergic to gluten and cannot eat it, or they will get really, really sick. That's pretty rare, truth be told. And in dogs, it's even rarer. So in dogs, there's a pretty low number of dogs that are truly allergic to grains, but there are a lot of testimonials out there. There's a lot of evidence that says, or a lot of, not scientific evidence, just to be clear, but a lot of people online that will tell you, grain-free was great for my dog. Once I switched, they're doing so much better. But in 2017, we started seeing that there were a lot more dogs that were eating grain-free diets that were developing a condition known as dilated cardiomyopathy. So the heart is a muscle that should pump blood very strongly around the body. But veterinarians were finding that there was a lot of dogs that were eating grain-free diets, and basically their heart would go from a very strong muscle to just kind of like a floppy sack that wasn't really good at pumping blood, and dogs were, having symptoms because of this. And what we found, what a lot of veterinarians were finding, is that once these dogs were switched off of a grain-free diet, once they started being medicated for their disease, we were able to reverse the dilated cardiomyopathy. And since 2017, the FDA has become involved, and they, requested that everybody that's finding these cases report them. They've gotten over 1,000 cases reported. Just this past year, they published some of their preliminary data, and they found that 93% of dogs that were reported to them, so 93% of their population that were reported to have dilated cardiomyopathy, were on grain-free diets. So we don't know that grain-free diet causes dilated cardiomyopathy. It just increases the risk, because the reality is that there are a lot of pets out there on grain-free diets that don't have this disease and have been on it for years and don't have the disease. But the reality is that there's something in these diets, certain more boutique or designer, less regulated or regimented diets, that are missing some type of nutrient, and it is causing disease. So in general, just to be safe, because there is no scientific evidence that grain-free diets are better than other diets, we don't have that evidence. So since that isn't proven that grain-free is healthier than grain-containing diets, and the truth is a lot of grains have really good nutrients for your pet, or at least the bacteria in their gut break down the grains and get and get their nutrients. So it's a good way to like nourish the microbiome of your pet. So in general, I don't recommend grain-free diets. And this is just kind of one example of why we need to be very careful when we're making diets for pets, and making sure that they have all the nutrients that the pets need. So what do I recommend? We've talked about a lot of different options, and we've talked about, so many different things that you could decide, whether it's the kibble or the wet food or the raw food or the home cooked food. So what do I recommend? Well, I go based off of some standards that are made by the World Small Animal Veterinary Association. This is a group of over 200,000 veterinarians internationally that come together, and they create resources for veterinarians. They have come up with a lot of standards that direct how veterinarians practice. And they came together and had like a global nutrition summit where they came up with criteria for veterinarians to use to evaluate companies that make food and decide which of these companies are better than the other ones. Because the reality is that, yes, while diets are out there and they are meeting basic minimums, the reality is that some of these companies are doing better than others. So some companies have better nutrients, they have better balanced diets, they have more options that are safer. And the WSAVA came together and said, all right, vets, you can evaluate these companies based off of a lot of different criteria. So the better companies are the ones that employ nutritionists or teams of nutritionists to evaluate their diets. They have strict quality control measures. They make their own diets at their own facilities rather than having them made, say, like in another country and then shipped into the United States because it's cheaper. They also just conduct their own studies. They evaluate their own diets with their own research within their own company. And so I've kind of done some of this work for you. And there are some diets and brands that I recommend. I'm not affiliated with any of them. I get no financial kickbacks by recommending them. These are just recommendations that I make to clients every day, strictly for the health of their pet. And so these companies, and I've kind of listed them all out here. These are the main ones that I generally recommend, and that based off of my research, I believe that they meet these international guidelines. And the main ones, just to run down: Hills, Royal Canin, Purina, Iams, and Eukanuba. And each of these companies has multiple different brands that you could feed your pet. Some of them are prescription, some of them are, made for, say, like the size of your pet. So like a toy breed versus a hunting breed versus just a general large breed. They have diets for different stages of life. And when it comes to picking, those specific diets, I would really recommend you just follow up with your veterinarian. Your primary care doctor can kind of chat with you about, well, your cat is so old and has this chronic disease, so I would recommend this type of diet. In general, these first three over here, Hills, Purina, and Royal Canin, have those prescription diets that you can get from your veterinarian. I at least know on the, science diet side of things, the Hills, that, if you are prescribed a diet and your pet doesn't eat it, that is a huge concern for owners, is that, I'm going to buy this $100 bag of dog food and my dog isn't going to take a bite of it. And that's a huge waste of money. If you buy it from Hills and if your dog doesn't eat it, you can return it for free, and get your money back. So that's a pretty reputable thing to do. And, I feed my own dog Hills. So if I feed my own dog that brand, I feel safe recommending it to my clients. And certainly, it is possible, like we were chatting about before, these diets could carry potential dangers for your pet. And the thing I rest on is that these companies are most likely to catch it. So they employ nutritionists and people that are meant, it's their whole job to make sure that what they're selling is safe. And the last thing they want is for their food to have to be recalled. So certainly there are things that fall through the cracks, and that's just a reality of our life. But these are kind of the brands I recommend. And certainly, you know, if you're feeding something different, that's fine. If your pet is happy and healthy, great. Chances are what you're feeding is excellent. So you don't have to have one of these diets. This is just to kind of provide a little, you know, this is what you're here for. So, you know, that's what I recommend. So moving on from that, moving away from what do I feed to how much do I feed? You know, this could go anywhere from, well, I feed 2 cups of food a day to, oh, I give them a scoop of food a day to, oh, I just fill up the bowl, doc. And generally the main thing I don't recommend is I don't recommend just free feeding, because that predisposes your pet to just eating as much as they want, and they could gain weight, which we'll talk about, you know, the risk factors for that later. And I also don't recommend these just kind of like scoops of food. I know it's pretty easy to just kind of have a scoop on hand, or use like an old McDonald's cup and have it in the food bin. But what I generally recommend is feeding a strict amount of food to your pet, that you know how much food your pet is getting. And you can kind of go based off of, there's typically pretty much every bag of food has a recommended amount that you should feed for your pet based off of their weight. And the reality is that recommended amount works for about 50% of pets. The other 50%, maybe they need a little bit less just because genetically they're more prone to gaining weight. Maybe they need a little bit more because they're running around a hyper little dog that you know, expels a lot of energy and calories throughout the day. So, you know, the back of the food bag is kind of a general guideline for if you've got no idea where to go. And I recommend just measuring what you're feeding, because you can tell over time, well, I've been feeding 2 cups for, you know, 3 months and Bella has gained 3 pounds. So we need to cut back from the 2 cups. It helps you and helps your vet direct you on how much to feed. And then, you know, so these pups here, they're waiting on food. How frequently do we feed? You know, there isn't a wrong answer to this except free feeding. And you know, and I give free feeding a harsh rap. Some pets are really good at regimenting their own, you know, caloric intake, and you could fill up the bowl. And some dogs and cats just, they aren't, you know, very food motivated and are more distracted by other things. And that's great if that works for you. We just kind of have to be careful, because a lot of pets, they're not that. They don't have as much self-control. Let's just put it that way. How frequently you feed your pets, you know, truthfully doesn't really matter. You know, some dogs, similar to the free feeders, you can put all their food in the bowl in the morning, and, you know, they'll graze throughout the day. Or, you know, maybe a breakfast, lunch, and dinner type situation is better for, you know, you. But some people, maybe they can only feed twice a day. There isn't really a right or wrong answer there. You know, unless maybe some pets, they do need to be fed frequently throughout the day just for their health status. But that's, you know, a discussion you would probably have with your veterinarian if your pet needs to be fed more frequently than, say, like 2 or 3 times a day. And then what do we do for treats? So there's certainly a lot of treats out there in the market. You know, if you're buying a similar treat to the brand of food you're buying, you know, that's a good option. The one thing you need to be careful is that treats are also calories. So treats can lead to weight gain. And there are some treats out there that can also lead to foodborne illness, such as like pig ears are a pretty common thing for people to give their dogs. Like they're just like dried ears of pigs that were processed. I'm working on publishing a study with the CDC right now about how people were getting salmonella from those. So animal byproducts, I generally don't recommend. And the dentists will tell you, you know, if you're feeding a treat that you can't take your thumbnail and make an indention in, it's called the rule of thumb. So if you literally can't take the treat and make an indention into the treat with the nail of your thumb, it's probably too hard for your dog, just in terms of their dental health. That's kind of an aside. But in general, what I recommend, if you're not particular to anything you bought off the shelf, fruits and vegetables are great. We want to stick away from table food, but fruits and vegetables are healthy for your dog and cat. And my dog Minnie loves watermelon. She loves apples. She loves pears. The nice thing is you can kind of trick your pet into thinking it is table food, and it's actually healthy. The pets don't have these preconceived notions that fruits and vegetables are unhealthy for you, like children seem to. But there are, a lot of great options that, some dogs are picky and won't eat these. So, it's not a one size fits all, but these definitely, especially if you're trying to restrict your pet's calories, cucumbers are excellent. They're crunchy, they're watery, pets love them in general. And you can feed them, basically a whole cucumber and it's like nothing. I don't know of too many pets that would eat kale or parsley. I just found this picture online, but I do generally recommend these as treats if you don't have one in particular. Sticking away from table food, and I'm as an ER veterinarian, I would be amiss to not include this in a nutrition lecture because I see this every day in the ER. So things that pets eat that they should not, because it will make them very sick. And I mentioned fruits and vegetables, so I'll kind of go over here first. So in particular, fruits and vegetables you want to avoid. Grapes and raisins are bad. They cause kidney failure. Onions and garlic can lead to a low red blood cell count. Avocados can lead to vomiting and diarrhea, so GI upset, and they can also cause choking or foreign body obstruction, so intestinal obstructions if they eat the pit. Nuts can either be damaging to the nervous system or the muscles. There are some more obvious things on here, like we certainly don't want to give our pets alcohol or coffee. The mushrooms that are being mentioned here are more or less like wild mushrooms. Generally, the ones that you buy at the store are safe, like the baby bellas, but in general, just kind of stay away from those. Dairy is safe in small amounts. So if you need to get your pet to take a pill, I always tell owners yogurt, a small amount of yogurt or a little bit of squeezed cheese, or like hiding a pill in like string cheese or something like that. That's a great option. As kind of an aside, hiding pills in marshmallows is also a good trick. But dairy, if your dog ate a whole bowl of ice cream, will probably have some diarrhea. In general, we want to stick away from bones. I know that bones is kind of classically what we think of in terms of, pets eating. What do dogs chew on? Bones. Well, actually, kind of going back to the rule of thumb, we want to avoid bones. I have seen plenty of pets come in with intestinal obstructions because they swallowed a pork bone or they swallowed a beef bone. Chicken bones generally will digest, but if something's too pokey, it can perforate the intestine and cause a pretty bad illness. So I generally recommend staying away from bones. Certain sweeteners, so be careful of like artificially sweetened peanut butter or artificially sweetened gum. If it contains this ingredient xylitol, in the short term, it causes low blood sugar. In the long term, it causes liver failure. So we want to stick away from that one. Chocolate, white chocolate is technically safer than, say, like dark chocolate. The more cacao that's in the chocolate, the worse off the pet will be. So if at low doses, we see diarrhea, vomiting. Higher doses, we can see heart muscle disease. And at even higher doses, we can see coma and death, and seizures. And then if we're feeding really fatty foods, so I know it's pretty common to, take your pet to the fast food, wherever you drive through and get them like a hamburger or something like that. Generally stay away from those. I know it's a way, it's a language, a love language to feed our pets, tasty things like that we enjoy. But, we have to be careful, especially small dogs are prone to a condition known as pancreatitis. The pancreas makes like insulin for us and helps digest food. And it can become really, really inflamed if pets eat real fatty food. So we kind of want to stay away from those in general. Because, I had a pet in the hospital that ate a teaspoon of taco meat off the ground and had really bad pancreatitis. And that condition can be life-threatening. So we want to be careful in that instance. So again, sticking away from the table food. So moving on from that topic, we're now going to talk, use the last about 10 minutes before we go to questions to chat about obesity and pets that are overweight. Certainly pets that are overweight are adorable. There's no denying that. You take a cute pet and they put on a couple pounds and now they're, precious. However, 60% of pets in the United States, so more pets than not, are overweight. And it's no fault of anyone's. This is something that happens so easily. Even if you're not free feeding your pet, even if you have the best intentions, you want to prevent this from the get-go, this is a reality. And there's no degree of self-blame that will prevent it. And truly the only thing we can do is be mindful of it and do what we can to work against it. So if our pet isn't overweight, doing everything we can to make sure that they don't become overweight. And if our pet is currently overweight, working slowly and steadily to trim off a few pounds. That's the best we can do. And at this point in time, what we know is that overweight pets are more likely to have arthritis when they get older. They're more likely to have metabolic disease like diabetes. They are more likely to have some types of cancers. The evidence is pretty clear out there that overweight pets will have shorter lifespans than pets that are the appropriate weight. So that's kind of, the little fear factor of all of this is it's certainly very challenging to deal with. But the reality is that we need to be cognizant of that. And I wanted to cover it, in at least some detail. Certainly, this is something that you're going to have to work with your veterinarian one-on-one to really have a good plan for your pet. But how do you know if your pet is overweight? So veterinarians will use these body condition scoring charts, which I don't expect the general owner to body condition score their pet. In general, what I tell owners is feel the sides of their chest. If you rub their, kind of discounting the fact that, some pets are fluffy and it's harder to feel their ribs because of hair. But if we press in and, if right away you feel your pet's ribs on the side of their chest, chances are they're a good weight. If the harder we have to push, the more likely it is that your pet is overweight. The harder we have to push to find their ribs, the higher they are on this body condition scale. And what this scale tells us is that for every point we go up, that's a 10% amount that they're overweight. So if ideally they would be 10 pounds, at a 5, a 6 would mean that they would be 11 pounds. So they would ideally lose 1 pound. A 7, ideally they would lose 2 pounds to be at the ideal weight. So they're 20% overweight, if that makes sense. Certainly this is something, this is your veterinarian's job to do this math. I just mean, I mean to convey this strictly, so that you have a frame of reference of how veterinarians think about this. And here's one for dogs. So it's certainly something that, we can kind of have a general understanding of, but we should defer to your veterinarian to kind of get a feeling for how much is my pet overweight. And when we finally make the decision that we want Fluffy and Bella to lose weight, it certainly is something that we first need to come to grips with the fact that it will take time. So intentionally, weight loss should be slow. So your pet should not lose weight any faster than 1 to 2% of its body weight per week. So if your pet is 10% overweight, it should at least take 5 weeks for your pet to get to ideal weight. If we're 40% overweight, now we're looking at quite a lot longer time for us to get back down to, the ideal weight. So at minimum 20 weeks. But the reality is that unfortunately, this takes a long time and it's hard. And it's why there's a lot of pets that are overweight, because it's a huge challenge and it's really hard to balance life as it is and to show our pet love through food, and to also keep them at, what's considered the ideal weight. So the first thing I recommend is chatting with your veterinarian. And what I mean by this is set up an appointment to talk to your veterinarian only about weight. Because in the 20 to 30 minute that you're meant to go see your vet and get your pet shots, and they do a physical and chat with you about things they found on the physical, and you also talk to them about other problems you're having at home, there's no time to talk about weight and weight loss. And the reality is that you really need like a full amount of time to talk about your pet's diet, how much you should be feeding them, how many treats you can offer them, specifics of things at home that are going to make it harder for your pet to lose weight. Because the reality is that you're going to need to get your whole household on board. Because if you want your pet to lose weight, it's not going to work if you're measuring out your pet's food, but your husband is measuring out a totally different amount, or your 3-year-old is dropping food on the ground, or your neighbor is coming by and giving treats. It really is a team effort to get your pet to lose weight. And that's why it's really important to have your veterinarian as a resource to tell them, like, hey, I have a child that is going to drop food or feed my dog, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. They can factor that into the weight loss plan and can say, well, if Fluffy is going to get 10% of their daily calories from accidental food intake, then we need to factor that into how much we feed them in their kibble. So that's what I mean by getting your veterinarian and getting your household on board. And be prepared for food seeking behavior. So be prepared for your dog to be begging with the puppy eyes, and your kitty to be in your face and clawing at you and jumping on the table and things like that. There are things that can be done to minimize this. So, things from, getting an automatic feeder to, feeding your pet more frequent small meals, or those low calorie treats like cucumbers really come in handy, or just distracting your pet. Be prepared that that's going to be a major burden, because I certainly know that when Minnie comes and knocks on my face and my computer to get food, it's so annoying, and I don't know how to make her stop. But the reality is we kind of have to show some tough love for the benefit of our pet's longevity and health. And then also think about exercise. So for your cats, laser pointers, little dangly toys and strings. There's lots of things to get them up and moving around. Just for 5 to 10 minutes a day can make a huge difference than just, laying there all day. Taking your dog out on a quick walk. Not only is that good for your dog, but that's great for you too. And it's okay to get frustrated, believe me. It's okay for this to take months. It's okay for it to fail, for you to check your pet's weight every 2 weeks, because that's generally what we recommend, 2-week weight checks, just to kind of keep track of things. And you can do that at home. You can weigh yourself and then pick up your pet and weigh yourself with the pet, or most veterinary clinics will do this for free, just as kind of like a drop by, weigh my pet, please. Especially if they know you're on a weight loss plan. So keeping track of weight, and it's okay if your pet stays the same. At least they didn't gain weight. And if they did gain weight, it's okay. We're still trying. The reality is that it takes time and it takes trial, and it's okay to give up for a little bit and pick up, bear the cross a little bit later on down the line if you just, at your wit's end. So, it's okay, but the reality is that it's essential for our pet's health. So with that, I'm going to move to questions. I'm going to open up the chat if I can figure out how. And I'm going to just kind of systematically run through the chat about anything that I see, and I'll read questions out loud. And if you have any additional questions, just feel free to just go ahead. Okay. All right. All right. Oh, wow. There's a considerable number of questions. I'm going to go really fast. Any recommendations for low-fat dog treats to give dogs with pancreatitis? Fruits and vegetables. Yeah, that is an excellent option because they're low fat. They also make low fat treats, the same type of prescription diet. Low fat treats are out there. Is it bad to feed dogs fish on a daily basis? I use a dry and wet mix of same brand and flavor. She has chicken allergies, but has never been superfood motivated. Fish diet is great. As long as it's a balanced diet, fish as a main protein source. My dog eats salmon. She's a salmon bagel. That's what we call her. So salmon is the primary ingredient in her kibble. Thoughts on constantly rotating proteins? One thing you have to be cautious of. So if you're going to be changing the protein source of your pet's diet, if you're going to be changing the protein that your pet is getting, you need to be slow in transitioning. So if your pet is on one type of diet and you want to switch them to another one, the transition needs to be slow over about 1 to 2 weeks, where we just start by adding like 2 tablespoons of the new food to the old food, and incrementally increasing that and monitoring, say, like your pet stool, because if it starts becoming looser, maybe we just kind of back down, because pets become very equilibrated to one type of diet, and if we feed them a different one, that can lead to stomach upset. So we need to be careful about that. There's not really any real reason you should have to change proteins unless you just want to, but that would be my recommendation. Is the farmer's dog a nutritious food? So it's one of the bigger brands out there that is considered raw. Truth be told, I don't know much in terms of, is it better than one diet than another? I know it's probably one of the more popular raw diets. And technically, that should mean that it is meeting the minimum nutritious standards. I haven't done any research as to whether or not it meets the WASAVA guidelines that I mentioned. But like I kind of mentioned before, I generally, recommend owners kind of stray away from raw foods, just kind of out of an abundance of caution. Is farmer's dog better than a high-end kibble food? Yeah, that kind of answers that. I recommend like a higher end, not necessarily higher end, but like one of those brands that I recommended rather than like the raw food. What about freeze-dried raw food like Stella and Chewy? Are they less likely to have issues? I don't think there's evidence out there. There is certainly not really any evidence that freezing food is going to eliminate bacteria in the food. So like if you freeze meat with salmonella, it's going to have salmonella when you unfreeze it. So that's, I don't necessarily say that it's probably like safer, but it is still another option. I feed my dog a mix of dry and wet food. A mix of dry and wet food is great. There's nothing wrong with feeding both dry and wet, just making sure that, we're kind of keeping track of how much they're getting, because that can be a lot of calories, but there's certainly nothing wrong with feeding both of those. And if your pet's healthy, then keep on keeping on. Prescription cat food is very hard to find. Any idea why and when shortage may end? Waiting to put my chubby cat on Hill's metabolic can dry. Yeah, so that is a reality that we're kind of struggling with COVID, and just kind of the state of veterinary medicine. The reality is that so many people are adopting pets these days. Veterinary care is skyrocketing in demand, which means that our medications and our diets are on back order. One thing that you can potentially chat with your veterinarian about in terms of this like metabolic diet is that, it's not necessary that your pet be on a weight loss diet to lose weight. They can lose weight on the diet that they're on, but you should chat with your veterinarian to make sure that it's got enough protein is the main thing. So if we restrict the amount they're getting, making sure there's enough protein in it. That's a big thing. These metabolic diets kind of, can ensure that sort of thing, because they're meant to be fed, calorie restricted, but still meeting nutrient requirements. So, if you're not able to find a certain food online because it's back ordered, maybe just chat with your veterinarian about another option. How do you know how much to feed if you are mixing wet food and dry food? So if you look closely on all your pet labels, there is a calorie amount. And you could kind of compare the calories of the wet food to the calories of the dry food. So if the dry food said, feed 2 cups of food, you could do the math to calculate how many calories that is. And then if you wanted to say feed half of those calories in wet food, then you could do the math to find out how much wet food. I know that's a couple math steps, but your veterinarian could also help you with that. So you can look specifically on the labels and it will say X number of kcals per cup. So that's the number of calories per cup. I was considering Dr. Harvey's Allergy. Do you know anything about this brand? She seems to be have an allergy because she's chewing her paws. Also, is there an allergy testing for dogs? I don't know anything about that specific diet. I do really enjoy dermatology. The reality is that a lot of pets are frequently allergic to, say, like chicken is the most common culprit of causing food allergies. But for some pets, it's not a food allergy at all. It's just environmental allergies. And there isn't a great test for it. We sort of, kind of rule everything else out. So ruling out that it's, not chewing at their paws because of, say, like fleas. Sometimes we would try, so like a food trial. And in some instances, we just try, say, like antihistamines or, kind of like long-term medications like Cytopoint or Apoquil, which help reduce food allergies and that sort of thing. Environmental allergy reactions. So, that's something I would recommend, following up with your pet with your vet, rather than just kind of starting a diet, afresh. So that way, you're not wasting your money on potentially a diet that might not be good for your pet. I hide pills in liverwurst. Is that okay in small amounts occasionally? I believe liverwurst is good. That's at least what people have told me, as long as it's in pretty small amounts. Like I said, marshmallows are a very benign, great way to hide pills. Small amounts of cheese, strawberries as well, all great ways to hide pets. I know grain-free isn't recommended, but thoughts on occasional grain-free treats? That should be just fine. Only has 2 ingredients, but is also advertised as grain-free. I mean, the thing we're pretty confident in is that it's something missing from these diets. So if that's all your pet is getting for nutrition, that's where the struggle comes, is that, we're worried that these grain-free diets are missing something. But if your dog is on a non-grain-free diet, so a diet that has grain, and instead you just and you have them on that, and then every now and then you give them, because fruits and vegetables, are most of them are grain-free. So that's totally fine. Do you know anything about the Himalayan cheese chews? I haven't heard about that one. I would say in moderation, they would probably be okay. How do you know how much fat is too much in a diet to be concerned about pancreatitis? It's really hard. So if your pet was ever diagnosed with pancreatitis, your vet will recommend likely a prescription low-fat diet, which those diets are lower than 2 to 3% in fat. So they're made special to make sure that they have enough of your pet's fat requirement, but that's kind of their cutoff to kind of prevent your pet from having future flare-ups. So it's hard to say, because like I said, I had a pet that came in with just a little bit, they ate a little taco meat, like it was a little Yorkie, and ate a teaspoon of taco meat off the ground, and that was it. And they got pancreatitis from that. So you got to kind of be careful. I feed my dog a mix of wet and dry. I usually soak the kibbles for at least 1 hour. Is it okay to soak kibbles? That's another great way to keep your pet's water intake up. If you don't want to feed the wet diet, you can just soak the kibbles in water, and that's going to get them all the water that they need in a lot of circumstances. So that's a great. Not dog or cat related, but is the Marshall Premium diet for ferrets good, or should this be supplemented? I see ferrets regularly in the ER. I'm not a ferret expert though on their nutrition. I can kind of manage their emergent disease with consultation with our exotics team. We have an excellent exotics department at Mount Laurel Animal Hospital. You could certainly, drop a question by them. Hard for me to answer that one. I'm sorry, Alyssa. Is it okay to regularly give a dog a probiotic? Probiotics are great. There's a lot of pets that have chronic GI disease, and they are strictly managed on probiotics. And there's a lot of safe probiotics out there. I typically recommend Fortiflora or Visbiome or ProViable are the 3 options that I generally will prescribe for my patients. If you have pets in a different age category, would it be better to feed them both regular adult food or senior food? This is tricky, because there isn't, say, like an age cutoff where your pet should start requiring, say, like a senior diet. And it's kind of tricky to also feed one pet one thing and the other pet another thing. That is a reality. So, I would say chat with your veterinarian about what options you're kind of considering. As long as it's a balanced diet, I would say it's probably safe for either pet to be on an adult food. And once they get, once both of them are cleanly in a senior category, you could switch them over, but it's hard to say. Is it okay to give a mix of raw diet and kibble? I know a lot of people that do that. It's just with the same, the same kind of precautions that if we're going to use the raw diet, we need to be more careful. And generally, if we want to be as careful as possible, just kind of avoiding it is what I generally recommend. Have you heard of doodles being allergic to chicken? Yeah, I mean, most pets that have food allergies are allergic to chicken. That's the main culprit we see. So certainly, something that you can kind of keep an eye on. Nona, I saw your email about your pet with EPI. I'm sorry about your pet with exocrine pancreatic insufficiency. I would recommend following up with your vet. I can't really necessarily say how to best go about medicating without seeing your pet. But I did send an email, and that will hopefully be forwarded to you to kind of respond to this question. Have you, okay, I answered that question. Farmer's dog is cooked and frozen. So farmer's dog is a diet that's not just raw. That's news to me. Thank you. Is it okay to make homemade food for special occasions if they are on kibble on a regular basis? Be careful with homemade foods though, because if they're very fatty, so, that I would be cautious, most boiled meats. So if we're talking about like homemade foods, so just kind of occasionally doing it, if we're taking meats and boiling them and skimming off the fat, that is a relatively safe way to make sure that they're going to be low fat and avoid the pancreatitis or GI upset risk. We can try homemade diets every now and then, as long as, we're being cautious of that and making sure it's not got toxic ingredients like the ones that were mentioned. And that infographic can be found online. If you just kind of search toxic foods for pets, you can find that really easy on Google. When you feed a cucumber, do you take the seeds out? And raspberry, seeds are fine. Seeds should be fine. My beagle had a sedated skin allergy test and has environmental allergies. I highly recommend people find a good dog dermatologist. Yeah, environmental allergies and food allergies kind of go hand in hand, and it's hard to suss them out. Do you recommend fish oil supplements? Yes, but chat with your veterinarian, because there are some out there that are not good for pets. some that either have too high of a dosage or not an appropriate dose to be effective. So chat with your veterinarian about, the type of fish oil that you're recommending. I don't typically prescribe out fish oils too frequently in my day-to-day life, so I don't have one off the top of my head to recommend, unfortunately. Dog food seems to be recommended as a certain amount of cups per pound. Is there a source to find out how many calories a dog should eat per pound of their weight? Yes. So if you want to do this math, if you Google Oklahoma or Ohio State Veterinary School, and it's like pet calorie calculator, you can type in their weight and it will tell you how many calories would maintain their weight. It won't tell you how many calories would restrict their weight. And if we're going to start restricting their food, I recommend consulting with your veterinarian. But that's kind of an online calculator that if you want to do that math, you can go there to the Ohio State Pet Veterinary Calorie Calculator, something of that nature. Is long-term use of Apoquel okay for allergies? Chat with your dermatologist and your vet or your primary care vet. In some pets it's okay, in some it's not. So it's hard for me to answer across the board. How long can my Great Pyrenees mix go on a hunger strike before I need to be concerned? Any recommendations for a picky eater? So picky eaters, I generally recommend if your pet has not eaten for 48 hours, you need to see a veterinarian. So your pet might not be eating because they are sick. It might not be that they just don't like their food. It might be that they're ill. So I would recommend if they go 48 hours, it's not just a hunger strike. It might be that they truly do not feel well. And the unfortunate thing is that some pets, they get into the expectation that they're going to get table food. And when we try to get them out of that expectation and get them eating dog food, they just won't have it. And it's really not, some vets may tell you, oh, just put the food down, your pet will eventually eat it. I generally don't recommend that. Sometimes these pets, if they've been conditioned to eat table food, they might need to be a pet that's going to be on a home cooked diet. And in that case, we need to chat with a nutritionist. So either go see your vet and maybe get your pet, some at least a physical just to make sure they're doing okay, but they might not be just on a hunger strike because they don't like their food. It might be because they're not feeling well. I'm sorry to hear about your Great Pyrenees. Royal Canin has different foods for particular breeds. Do you have any thoughts on these? Certainly great options. If you want to pick one, Royal Canin is generally one of the more pricier ones. But like I said, this brand is really good. And meets the guidelines that I kind of evaluate foods off of. So if you want to pick out one that's specific to your Cavalier King Charles Spaniel or your Beagle, you can pick that. Yes, if allergic to chicken, would allergy extend to all poultry? Generally, that's what we assume. So if your pet's allergic to chicken, probably allergic to turkey or, whatever other type of, diet that they're on. Is fresh pet safe for a dog to eat? I believe that's another one of the raw foods. So just kind of going back to my original recommendation on that one. What would you recommend for dogs that have diabetes and need to eat but refuse, and you need to give them medicine? If your pet is diabetic and will not eat for 24 hours, chat with your veterinarian. Your pet might need an appetite stimulant. They might not be feeling well. We might need to find, some different options for them. But that certainly is a concern for diabetics that aren't eating and need their insulin. So with them, I truly only give them a 24-hour window to kind of demonstrate that they're interested in eating something. You could maybe either try canned foods to stimulate their appetite. You could try home cooking some, boiled chicken and put that on top of their food and see if they'll be interested in that. That's kind of my general recommendation. But if your diabetic is going too long without eating, I would say, kind of stray away from that. Can dander or skin or dry skin on a cat mean they may be allergic to chicken? Maybe. Not all the time though. It could be other things. What about byproducts listed as a primary ingredient? Yeah, so there is some debate out there about byproducts. So, like animal byproducts, are they a concern? So going back to the company that sort of regulates all of these ingredients that go in, and I know that there's certainly some concern that our pets are going to be eating some random byproducts of things that aren't healthy for them. The AFCO, the company that makes sure pet foods have appropriate ingredients and appropriate nutrition, are evaluating these byproducts, and they are assessing whether or not they are safe for your pet. So I think there's quite still a lot of questions. I'm going to try to scroll through, and I'm probably going to end things in about 5 minutes. Everybody can hang in there. I really appreciate everybody hanging in and all of the questions. This has been excellent. I have a thin 2-year dog. She does not like kibble and only eats canned food. Is that okay? Yes. I feed from, yes. What about we talked about that. Okay, I think I might have covered a lot of these. And if someone mentioned baby food and dog food. What do you think about that? Baby foods are a great way to stimulate your pet's appetite. So, as long as they don't have onions and garlic, those are the 2 big things that, might be toxic ingredients in baby food to be on the lookout for. Baby food we do use in the hospital to kind of stimulate appetite. Okay. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I hope this was helpful. I hope there's a lot of information out there. We could probably talk for another 3 hours about pet nutrition. Certainly feel free to reach out to Mount Laurel with any further questions. We're probably going to have another seminar like this, so be on the lookout. It'll be a different topic. But have a great night, everybody. Take care. Be well.